Bulletproof is a word that gets used way too casually in the used luxury market. A premium car can have a strong engine and still become a bad buy if it was neglected, crashed, overheated, or maintained on wishful thinking. So this is not a list of perfect cars. It is a look at sedans that got cheap for a different reason. The market moved on, SUVs took over, sedans lost status, older tech started looking dated, and some genuinely decent cars were abandoned faster than they deserved. Let's start with the least glamorous one because it may be the most rational. It does not have the rear-wheel drive swagger of an old luxury sedan. It does not have German badge energy. It does not look expensive enough to impress strangers. And even when it was new, it felt like the kind of car someone bought after they had already decided they were done caring what anyone else thought. That sounds like an insult, but on the used market, it may be the whole reason the car works. The MKZ Hybrid became cheap because it was trapped in the wrong moment. Lincoln was trying to move toward crossovers and SUVs. Buyers were doing the same thing. And a quiet hybrid sedan from a brand with weak excitement was never going to hold value like something with more image. But strip away the badge problem, and the idea is pretty rational. The hybrid version is the one to pay attention to, not because it is fast. It is not. Not because it feels sporty. It does not. But because it gives you a quiet cabin, good fuel economy, a comfortable ride, and a powertrain that is more sensible than the car's luxury badge might suggest. The fear is obvious. Used luxury hybrid. That phrase makes people imagine expensive battery repairs and mystery warning lights, and yes, you have to take the hybrid system seriously. This is not a car to buy blind because the price looks friendly. But the MKZ Hybrid is not some rare science experiment. It uses familiar Ford family hybrid thinking, and the eCVT style setup is very different from the fragile reputation people attach to some conventional CVTs. The real filter is condition. You want records, you want the hybrid battery checked, you want a scan for stored codes, you want every seat, motor, screen, climate function, camera, sensor, and electronic feature tested before money changes hands. A cheap one with a vague history is not a deal. It is homework with wheels. The best target is a clean, later car, especially from 2017 onward, because the styling and equipment feel more resolved. The reserve trim can be nice, but do not pay for complexity you do not care about. This car makes sense for someone who wants a quiet, efficient, premium commuter and does not need the car to feel exciting. It does not make sense for someone chasing speed, sharp handling, modern luxury theater, or status. The MKZ Hybrid is not cool, but in a used car market full of people overpaying for image, boring can be a strategy. And the next car has a different problem. The Lincoln was ignored because it was not glamorous. The Acura was ignored because it was almost too polite to be remembered. The Acura RLX is what happens when a company builds a flagship for people who do not really want to act like they bought a flagship. There is no big arrival moment with this car. No dramatic shape, no intimidating grille, no obvious status signal. Even the name sounds like something Acura typed into a spreadsheet and forgot to replace later. And that is why the RLX disappeared from the conversation. It was expensive enough to compete with serious luxury sedans, but not emotionally loud enough to pull people away from Lexus, Mercedes, BMW, or Audi. Acura buyers often wanted value and reliability. Luxury buyers often wanted prestige. The RLX sat awkwardly between those groups. Too nice to be ordinary. Too invisible to feel special. That is a rough place to live when new. Used, it gets more interesting. The non-hybrid 3.5 P-AWS version is the one I would focus on. The Sport Hybrid is fascinating, and on paper it has the more interesting engineering story. But interesting does not always mean easier to own 10 years later. The regular V6 car keeps the equation cleaner. Naturally aspirated engine, conventional automatic in later models, front-wheel drive, and Acura's rear steering system instead of a more complicated hybrid all-wheel drive setup. That does not make it cheap to ignore. The timing belt matters. The rear steer system needs to work properly. Electronics need to be tested like you are buying a premium car, because you are. And if the seller waves away missing records by saying, it's basically a Honda, that is not a maintenance history. That is a red flag wearing confidence. The RLX got cheap partly because nobody was emotionally invested in saving it. There is no giant fan base pushing prices up, no huge collector story, no badge cachet strong enough to protect resale value. But that lack of hype is also why a clean one can be worth a look. The car suits a buyer who wants a large, quiet sedan with Acura logic and does not care if the neighbors notice. It is for someone who appreciates calm competence more than drama. It is not for a person who wants a flashy cabin, cutting-edge infotainment, or the feeling of owning something iconic. And it is definitely not for someone trying to buy the cheapest luxury sedan in town and hope the badge does the rest. The right RLX is not exciting. but it is more serious than the market gave it credit for. Before we get to the next car, drop a comment. Which premium sedan do you think deserved a better fate? And if you like used car stories without the hype, subscribe to the Auto Ally. Now, the Infiniti is the opposite kind of forgotten. The Acura faded because it whispered. Luxury buyers wanted bigger screens, cleaner interfaces, newer driver assistance tech, and interiors that felt like the future. The Q70 felt like it came from an earlier chapter of Infiniti, back when the brand had more edge, more confidence, and more of a rear-wheel drive identity. By the late 2010s, that identity was fading. Infiniti did not have the same heat it once had. The Q70 did not feel fresh enough to fight the Germans, not polished enough to scare Lexus, and not practical enough to pull SUV buyers back into sedans. So it became one of those cars people respected in theory and ignored in reality. But used buyers do not always need the future. Sometimes they need hardware that makes sense. That is where the 3.7 comes in. The V8 has charm, but it brings more fuel cost, more expense, and a smaller buyer pool. The V6 is the more defensible version, naturally aspirated, familiar, strong enough, and paired with a traditional automatic. This is not a modern luxury tech experience. The infotainment is not the selling point. The cabin layout will not trick anyone into thinking it is new. The fuel economy is not going to make you feel clever. But there is something refreshing about a premium sedan that still uses physical controls, an old-school powertrain, and a platform that does not feel like it was built around a tablet. The catch is ownership history. A Q70 can become a problem when it falls into the hands of someone who treats it like a cheap used Nissan with nicer leather. Suspension wear, leaks, neglected fluids, tired tires, worn interior pieces, aging electronics, and rough transmission behavior all need attention before purchase. The engine's reputation does not cancel out bad maintenance. People make with cars like this. They hear naturally aspirated V6 and stop thinking. Do not stop thinking. Look for a clean, stock example with records. Rear-wheel drive is appealing if your climate allows it. All-wheel drive can make sense if you actually need it, but it adds another system to inspect. This car fits someone who wants a more traditional, premium sedan and is comfortable with older tech. It is for a buyer who would rather have mechanical familiarity than digital flash. It does not fit someone who wants the newest cabin experience, the cheapest possible running costs, or a car that feels current the second they sit inside. The Q70 became cheap because it aged out of fashion, but age is not always the same as weakness. And that leads to the strongest car here, the one enthusiasts already know, but mainstream buyers still walked away from. The Lexus GS 350 is the car that proves this video's point best, because this one was not ignored because the badge was weak, it was not ignored because the company lacked a reliability reputation, and it was not some strange experiment that buyers could not understand. It was a traditional Lexus sport luxury sedan with a naturally aspirated V6, rear-wheel drive bones, a serious chassis, and a level of long-term confidence that still means something on the used market. And it still died. That tells you how powerful the SUV shift became. The GS did not lose because it suddenly forgot how to be a good sedan. It lost because fewer people wanted sedans at all. Lexus buyers moved toward the RX, families wanted crossovers, premium buyers wanted height, cargo space, and the feeling that they were buying the safer, more practical choice. The GS became a car for people who still cared about the old luxury sedan formula. That audience was loyal, but it was not big enough. The 350 is the one to focus on. The GSF is special, but it belongs in a different conversation. The 4-cylinder turbo models exist, but the naturally aspirated V6 is the version that best matches the point here. Simple enough to understand, refined enough to justify the badge, and respected enough that clean examples still do not get thrown away cheaply. That last part matters. The GS is probably the least cheap car in this video. Nice ones can still cost real money, and that can frustrate people who compare it to older German sedans or forgotten Infinitis. But the price strength is part of the evidence. The market did not completely forget the GS. Enthusiasts know what it is. Lexus people know why it matters. And careful used buyers often discover that the cheapest example is not the smartest one. This is a condition-first car. Records matter, accident history matters, tire quality matters, suspension feel matters. All-wheel drive cars need proper service. F-Sport versions can be more desirable, but they can also bring pricier wear items. So the badge alone is not enough reason to pay more. And no, the Lexus name does not magically protect you from a bad previous owner. A neglected GS is still a neglected premium car. The appeal is that a good one feels like it was built during a moment when Lexus still cared deeply about making a proper sedan, not just filling a segment. It has enough power, enough comfort, enough road manners, and enough mechanical sense to remain relevant for a buyer who does not need an SUV. But avoid it if you want maximum cargo space, the newest screens, or the lowest entry price. The GS350 is for someone who understands that paying more for the right example can be cheaper than rescuing the wrong one. It is not a secret. It is simply a car the broader market stopped prioritizing, and that is why it closes the list. Because if even the GS could not survive the sedan collapse, then the story was never just about the cars. It was about what buyers stopped valuing. These four sedans did not all depreciate for the same reason. The Lincoln MKZ Hybrid lost attention because rational cars rarely create desire. The Acura RLX faded because quiet competence is hard to sell as luxury. The Infiniti Q70 aged into a strange advantage, where yesterday's simplicity started looking useful again. And the Lexus GS 350 showed that even a respected sedan can get pushed aside when the market decides it wants height, cargo space, and crossover confidence. None of these cars are perfect. None should be bought casually. The right version matters. Maintenance records matter. A clean history matters. A proper inspection matters more than any reputation on the internet. But that is what makes this corner of the used market worth studying. Sometimes a car gets cheap because it deserves to. Other times, it gets cheap because buyers moved on emotionally before the car stopped making sense mechanically. And for the right used car buyer, that difference can be everything. So here is the question. Which premium sedan do you think lost value for the wrong reason? Not because it was bad, but because the market stopped caring?